Let's go to our panel now. Tim Blair from the Daily Telegraph joins us from the Wimmera, and Mark Nicholson from Stepmates Studios live from Melbourne. Thanks for joining us, gents. Got to talk about all this argy-bargy when it comes to pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel protests that were planned sickeningly for Monday, October the 7th, the one-year anniversary of the atrocities. Tim, there's been a change of heart in Sydney, at least, where they had to get there was a court hearing into this. They say that they're not going to have an official protest on the 7th now, which is good news, although I suspect they're going to turn up somewhere somehow anyway.
Absolutely, and a matter such as this should not even come before a court. Obviously, it should be a matter of humanity and realising that October 7 is a day when you really should just put aside the whole argument. It's only the first anniversary. This is still raw. It'll be raw for years, for decades, and yet certain groups, obviously, want to exploit this and make it more powerful of an issue than it is, and they want to. Basically, they want to hold a party. And I've heard some Palestinian groups describing it as a vigil. Well, why would it be a vigil from their point of view? Yeah. Who were the people who were killed?
Yeah, so I agree with you. It shouldn't be a matter of legal cases and court bans and police action. Anybody with an ounce of humanity in their body would not want to commemorate this day in this way, to make this protest. And not only are all those deaths and the ensuing consequences fresh in our minds, Tim, but there are 101 hostages still unaccounted for. We know many of those will be dead, but we know some are alive, Mark, and yet they want to celebrate this atrocity while there are people who have been in captivity at the hands of Hamas for a year on Monday.
Yeah, mate, and your anger there is 100% justified, to be honest. It's absolutely deplorable. Just the other day when I was seeing those pictures, holding up the former leader of Hezbollah up as if it was like a memorial, as if it was to be celebrated, was absolutely disgusting. If you told me, a year after September 11, that they were going to be holding up pictures of Osama bin Laden and that we were going to have a bunch of leaders floating around who were going to be using weak language and basically encouraging this sort of stuff, I would have told you were nuts. But it's so emblematic of just how much hatred there is for the West at the moment. And with everything that's going on in the world, it blows my mind that people are like this. It's really scary that this is Australia and that this is what's happening. Yeah,
this is what troubles me. We live in this great country and there's all sorts of creeds and ethnic backgrounds here. And if you live in Sydney and Melbourne, there are areas where there's a big concentration of Muslim communities or Jewish communities. And up until relatively recently, you think this is a wonderful thing that everybody just coexists. But, Tim, to think that we even have people in our country who would want to march and gloat over October the 7th, it sickens me and frightens me.
Well, yes, and as Mark was talking about post 9/11, we did as well. We did have people who were honouring Osama bin Laden after that. There were people who were defending that horrific series of attacks back in 2001. We do have obviously a massive problem with let's just generally call it, because it's not all Muslims who are in this sort of in this population sector.
Not. Yeah.
It's a lot of people who are just on the generic sort of Australian left, who are maybe overdoing it a bit on the encouragement of multiculturalism, let's say. Yeah,
well, the bloke you always see fronting up, speaking on behalf of the Sydney protesters, he's not a Muslim. He's an Anglo-Australian bloke who's a leading socialist activist. He's with the Socialist Alliance or whatever they call themselves. So they're doing a lot of damage to Australia, which is what they want to do. Let's move on to something a little bit more heartening, I suppose. It proves that life goes on as per normal. A good old-fashioned campaign gaffe, just sort of one day into the Queensland state election campaign, and the Premier, Stephen Miles, is campaigning in an electorate. And one of the things you want to know when you're campaigning in an electorate is who your candidate is. He had no idea. Have a look.
So, Mr. President, most of the parties have raised the second person
I'll find out where they are and let you know.
What's the name of the candidate for
I don't have that detail in front of me.
You don't have the name of the candidate that's running for your team in the seat that you're in today?
Susan? Yeah, of course, it's Susan. Yeah.
Premier, on CS Energy...
I was with her the other night. So.
Oh, Marcus, so good. He's in the electorate. Come here and vote Labor. Vote number one for, what's her name?
Yeah, giggles, his smile wiped off pretty quick and his face turned about as red as the banner behind him. It was, I've been thinking, it's been a long time since I've seen a gaffe from Milesy on this campaign. Anyone would think that they've sort of given up. Well, there's evidence that they have. We're hearing reports that there are a lot of Labor candidates that are just sitting around waiting to lose, and there it is. It's clear as crystal. They are pretty much just not trying in this election. It's nuts.
Tim, he'll end up writing the candidates' names on the back of his hand soon.
Well, everyone thought right up until that Tim Walz, the US vice presidential candidate, he'd had the worst week of a politician in the world. Well, we might have found someone who's saying, hold my beer, hold my Forex.
All right, well, I've got another one for you. I noticed this today. we know how our esteemed Prime Minister is actually embarrassing the country with his spineless attitude to Israel and matters Middle East. So what is he doing in his spare time? Well, he's getting onto social media, trying to play people's hero in the supermarkets. Have a look at this.
You will have seen it. A product comes out in new packaging. It's the same price as before, but the box feels a little bit lighter. It's called shrinkflation, and it's a trick supermarkets and food retailers use to charge you more when you're getting less.
Mark, this is beyond satire. He is satirising himself. This is the incredible shrinking Albanese before our very eyes.
He's just so desperate for any sort of positive press at the moment. You can see it in his face. He's just desperate for it. And it's weird because I know that they're all playing buddies anyway with the big supermarkets. You know, when you've got immigration levels as unsustainable as they are, that's feeding into the supermarkets, which is helping them, and it's helping the banks, and that's what it all is. They're all mates behind the scenes. This is kind of just a weird thing. This is all just for TikTok and just to try and get some positive reviews for once for Albo, but it is embarrassing.
Tim, yeah, it's just so embarrassing. It's so un-prime ministerial. He can't handle the big stuff, so he wants to be the checkout guy.
It might be un-prime ministerial, but it certainly is presidential because Joe Biden tried exactly this same dumb distractionary tactic.
Did he?
You know, as his brain was turning into breakfast cereal, and it seems I keep talking about this. Every dumb idea out of the US left ends up being adopted by the Australian left. And this is another one, shrinkflation. It's, when you're following ideas that were abandoned by Joe Biden 6 months ago, you're really not trying very hard, are you?
Spot on. Well, speaking of Joe Biden, of course, as you'd both know, America's been hit by another horrific hurricane. A lot of flooding in Florida. There always is because it's about 1.5 metres above sea level right across Florida. But, of course, it's climate change that's driving this. Who knows? Who's the expert on this? Joe Biden. Have a look.
Let me close with this. Nobody can deny the impact of climate crisis anymore. At least I hope they don't. They must be brain dead if they do.
You must be brain dead if you deny it, Mark. This is the world's leading expert on brain dead.
Yeah, I think I had the same reaction as everyone else when they saw that this morning. They all went, I'm brain dead. Like it's kettle black. I just turned into a primary school kid. I was like, "You are." It takes one to know one. I started doing all these things to the computer screen. Just ridiculous, absurd.
Yeah, and Tim, I don't know whether you're a Tim Tam man, but we've been talking about how they've hit $6 in Australia. Somebody's gone to the trouble to check the price in the UK. They're cheaper in England. We're going to have people smuggling Tim Tams back into the country where price. Maybe Albo needs to get on this. Albo needs to do a TikTok on Tim Tam.
100%.
Are we going to have an election on Tim Tam shrinkflation? Because that would be something else, wouldn't it? But it is. This whole story reminds me of when the internet was a baby, when things were just happening and people were able to communicate much more easily across nations. Some enterprising Australian mothers whose kids were in the UK, they set up an internet thing so that their offspring could buy Australian products. And great idea. So they were buying cherry ripes and Tim Tams. The most popular international item, though, for kids overseas, Australian kids overseas, Salada biscuits.
Salada, gotta love your salada. All right, thanks for joining us, guys. Keep an eye on the incredible shrinking Prime Minister for us. He's going to disappear before our very eyes.